My name is Karen Nelson, and never in my life did I imagine I'd become the kind of woman crouched behind a tree, silently witnessing the unraveling of everything she'd built. It was one of those gray Seattle afternoons where the rain doesn't fall. It lingers, clinging to your skin like regret. I was on my way back from the grocery store, arms aching from the weight of overstuffed plastic bags. Inside were the familiar ingredients for Daniel's favorite dish, lasagna. Ground beef, creamy ricotta, and fresh basil leaves he always said reminded him of our early years. After 2.5 decades of marriage, I'd learned to move through life on autopilot, navigating our rituals like muscle memory. But on that day, the familiar turned foreign. Taking my usual shortcut through Cedar Park, I inhaled the scent of rain-soaked pine and damp earth. Then I saw them. Daniel, my husband of 25 years, was sitting under a towering cedar tree, his arm resting casually around a woman with silky blonde hair. She couldn't have been much older than our daughter, Lily. The rain picked up, but they didn't move. She was laughing, her hand resting on his leg. And Daniel, he was smiling at her. That tilted grin that once made my knees weak in college when we stayed up late whispering dreams into the darkness. He brushed her fingers with a gentleness I hadn't felt in longer than I could admit. Something in my chest cracked. The bag slipped from my grip, the contents thudding against the wet grass. I ducked behind a nearby tree, holding my breath like I could disappear. In that moment, my entire existence narrowed down to a park bench, a man I once knew, and the sting of betrayal soaking through my coat. I wanted to confront them, demand an explanation, scream out all the pain rising in my throat. But my feet stayed rooted to the ground. Maybe it was dignity, or maybe it was the quiet voice inside that whispered, "You saw this coming." So I turned and walked home, step by step, as if the sidewalk might crumble beneath me. 25 years. A quarter-century of memories, compromise, and sacrifice. By the time I reached the kitchen, I was moving like a ghost. I unpacked the groceries mechanically. The basil looked too bright, too full of life for a world that suddenly felt so empty. I had given up so much for Daniel, my passion for architecture, a scholarship for grad school. I let it all go so he could climb the corporate ladder. I stayed behind to raise Lily, to keep our house humming smoothly, to make sure the man I loved had everything he needed. I swallowed his moods, patched over our silences, and kept believing we were still a team. Now those touches, those smiles, belonged to someone else. As rain tapped gently against the windows, something inside me shifted. Not just sorrow, but a quiet spark of steel. I wouldn't crumble. Not yet. That night, I cooked dinner like always. The rich aroma of garlic and tomatoes filled the kitchen, pretending everything was fine. I set the table for two, the clinking plates ringing louder than any words between us. Daniel walked through the door later than usual, slamming it behind him like nothing had changed. "Hey, Karen. Smells amazing," he said, tone overly cheerful, fake in a way only I could recognize. He strolled into the kitchen and kissed my cheek, a quick, detached peck. I caught a whiff of cologne, sharp, synthetic, foreign. Not the subtle, woodsy scent I'd grown used to over the years. "Lasagna?" I asked, my voice unexpectedly calm. "You're late again." He shrugged, eyes already glued to his phone. "Big campaign at work. You know how it is." Liar, I thought, but said nothing. I watched him closely, trying to find traces of the man I married. But he wasn't there. The boy who once danced barefoot with me in our first apartment, who promised we'd take on the world together, had faded. His gaze slid past me like I was part of the wallpaper. Dinner was quiet. The lasagna on his plate went untouched. "Need to get back to reports," he muttered, disappearing into his office. I cleared the table alone. The rhythm of cleaning brought no peace, just a numb repetition, like I was preserving the illusion of normal. As I scrubbed the dishes, my thoughts spun like a storm. I'd spent years excusing his absences, convincing myself they were for the sake of our family, for a future we were building together. But the laughter I'd heard in the park, the tenderness in his touch, it wasn't for me anymore. That reality stung like acid. Still, under all the pain, a new feeling started to grow. A quiet fire, the instinct to protect what was left of me, to stop being the woman who endured in silence. Later that night, I lay awake beside him, his soft snoring out of sync with the thunder inside my chest. The bedroom was silent except for the rain drumming on the roof, steady and unforgiving. I stared at the ceiling, lost in memories. I saw us at 22, sharing cheap takeout on the floor of our college apartment, dreaming of a life built on passion and partnership. I remembered how I wanted to design sustainable buildings, how I wanted to create something lasting, something real. But when Daniel landed that job at the firm, I shelved those dreams. Just for a while, he'd said, and I had believed him. I took a part-time position at the local library, managed our household, and poured everything I had into raising Lily, while Daniel chased promotions and praise. I thought back to all the arguments we'd weathered, the sharpness of his tone when his job wore him down, the way I'd always been the one to apologize first, just to keep the calm. Over time, I hadn't just shelved my career, I'd slowly given up parts of who I was, always telling myself it was for our family, for love. But now, those sacrifices didn't feel noble. They felt like shackles. The image of Daniel with that woman, her fingers resting in his, her laughter so casual, it pierced deeper than I thought possible. I had trusted him, loved him, and in return, I had become invisible inside my own story. Tears slipped from the corners of my eyes. I let them fall quietly, so he wouldn't hear. He slept soundly beside me, while my world came undone in silence. But as the first light of morning slipped through the curtains, something shifted inside me. Not rage, not despair, just a firm, steady realization I wasn't going to crumble. Not now. It was time to reclaim whatever I still could, before there was nothing left. The next morning, I met Jennifer for coffee at a small cafe tucked away in downtown Seattle, the kind of place with chipped mugs and the warm scent of espresso hanging in the air. Jennifer, who'd been my closest friend since we were teenagers, sat across from me, her notary pin gleaming against her blazer. "You look like hell, Karen," she said, blunt as always, but not unkind. I stirred my latte, watching the foam dissolve. "He's seeing someone else," I murmured, the words burning in my mouth. "I saw him yesterday, in the park, with a girl who could have been our daughter." Jennifer didn't flinch, just took a slow sip of her coffee. "So," she said, "what now?" Gonna scream, throw dishes, beg him to stay. Her words, as cutting as they were, pierced through my haze. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I want to scream, but I'm stuck. The house, the cabin, our savings, it's all under both our names. If he leaves, I'm left with nothing." She tapped her fingernails against her cup, her eyes narrowing. "You have more than you think. Trust is soft, Karen, but betrayal requires precision. Come by my office tomorrow. We'll move the house and the cabin to Lily's name. Get your money in order. You're not powerless, no matter what it feels like." Her words hit something deep inside me, a place that had long been asleep. For years, I defined myself by what I gave. Now, for the first time in decades, I was ready to take back something for myself. As we left the cafe, the wet pavement shimmered beneath our feet. For the first time in days, the rain didn't feel so suffocating. It felt like a clean slate, waiting for my next move. What followed were weeks of quiet rebellion. In Jennifer's office, I signed documents transferring ownership of both our family home and the lakeside cabin to Lily. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of such irreversible choices. Part of me felt like I was betraying everything Daniel and I had built. But every time I remembered that moment in the park, the image of his hand on hers, my resolve sharpened. I shut down our shared bank account and moved the funds into an account under Lily's name. I sold the sapphire earrings my mother had left me in her will, tucked the cash away somewhere safe. Insurance policies, property deeds, financial papers, I handed it all to Jennifer for safekeeping. Each decision untangled another thread from the life I'd wrapped myself in. A life I now saw clearly for what it was, one-sided. At dinner, I'd catch Daniel's glance, distant, distracted, and wonder how I missed the signs. He'd come home late, mumbling something about meetings, and I'd nod, pretending not to see the truth. The kitchen became my battlefield, my refuge. I'd dice vegetables with more purpose than ever before, each slice a quiet act of resistance. I still cooked his meals, but now, every move was no longer for him. It was for the version of me I'd hidden away for too long. There was guilt, Yes. But alongside it, a newfound clarity that tasted a little like freedom. Then came the gray October evening when Daniel walked in carrying 2 suitcases. His jaw was tense. The rain outside drummed softly, echoing that day in the park. Only now, the roles were reversed. "We need to talk," he said, eyes darting everywhere but at me. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, surrounded by the stillness of everything unsaid. "I'm leaving," he said bluntly. "I've met someone. It's serious." His voice was emotionless, almost rehearsed, like he'd been practicing this in his head for days. I stared at my hands, worn from years of dishes, diapers, dinners, and all I felt was tired. "I hope you won't fight me over the property," he continued, mistaking my silence for surrender. "I need the house. You can keep the cabin. You love that place, right?" I looked up slowly, my gaze calm but immovable. "The house isn't ours anymore," I said. "I signed it over to Lily weeks ago. The cabin, too." He froze. The color drained from his face. "You did what?" he stammered. "That's not legal. You can't just do that." "I could," I replied gently. "It was jointly owned. Lily is our daughter. You're not going to sue her, are you?" His jaw tensed, fury flushing his face. "What about the money? Our savings?" I gave a slight shrug. "What's left belongs to Lily now. For her future." He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over in the process. His voice rose in anger, shouting about betrayal, about how I'd gone behind his back. But I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, steady and unafraid. That night, Daniel walked out of the house for good, dragging his luggage into the drizzle. And standing by the curb, waiting for him, was Jessica, the woman from the park that he threw up his hands, trying to explain himself. But she simply shook her head, climbed into her car, and drove off without another word, leaving him standing there, soaked and alone. I didn't feel triumph, not exactly. What settled over me was a strange, soothing stillness. Not happiness, but a quiet sense of release. In the weeks that followed, whispers of his unraveling began to reach me. Lily mentioned he was crashing on a buddy's couch, drinking more than he should. His suits, once tailored to perfection, were now wrinkled and sad. The firm that used to praise him endlessly had started pushing him aside. His smile couldn't save him anymore. Meanwhile, I moved with purpose. Slow, steady steps toward a life I could finally claim as my own. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center, letting each brushstroke dissolve a bit of the ache I still carried. That's where I met Mia, a retired teacher with a sharp tongue and a contagious laugh. She coaxed me out to trivia nights, where I found myself laughing again, genuinely, for the first time in ages. Lily and Jerry visited often. His little feet patted across my floors, his giggles echoing off the walls like music. But in the quiet hours after they left, I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, not grieving Daniel, but mourning the years I'd spent pouring myself into a version of us that was never real. The hurt was still there, dull and familiar, like a bruise that no longer screamed when touched. I wasn't healed yet, but I was no longer broken. One drizzly afternoon, the doorbell rang. Standing on the porch was Jessica, her hair stringy, her mascara smudged, eyes heavy with regret. "I'm Jessica," she said softly. "I was hoping we could talk." I let her in. The kitchen still carried the sweet scent of cinnamon rolls I had baked that morning. She sat stiffly at the table, hands clenched around her purse like it was keeping her upright. "You probably hate me," she began. "I don't," I replied, setting down 2 mugs of tea. "I don't even know you." The words came spilling out. Daniel had told her our marriage was done, that we had an understanding, that he had money, a home, stability. Then everything unraveled. She looked down, voice shaking. "Now he's got nothing." I simply nodded. None of it surprised me. Daniel was a master at selling dreams. I'd bought into them for 25 years. She looked up, eyes searching mine. "He's drinking. He lost his job. He's not okay. Maybe you could take him back." I met her gaze, kind but firm. "I lived for him for decades," I said. "Now I'm living for myself." When she left, I stepped out onto the balcony, kneeling beside the lavender I'd planted weeks ago. The soil was rich, breathing. I had spent so many years building a life around Daniel. But now, each bloom, every brushstroke, was a gift to myself. That truth settled in me like sunlight after a long storm. Spring arrived early. The cherry blossoms unfolded across the city, softening the gray skies. My little balcony exploded with color, lavender, daisies, green shoots of new beginnings. I painted more than ever. My canvases brimmed with deep ocean blues and hopeful greens. Mia had become a regular fixture in my life, her humor a balm I hadn't known I needed. Lily and Jerry filled my weekends. His tiny trucks cluttered the living room. His excited chatter filled every silence. Joy, loud and unfiltered, had returned to my home. One night, Lily and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping wine as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Dad's been texting," she said hesitantly. "He says he's sorry. He wants to come home." I glanced toward the window. The rain had stopped, and the sky was scattered with stars. "He writes to me, too," I said. "I don't reply." She studied my face. "Would you ever take him back?" I thought of Daniel's grin, the one I used to love, how it had faded in my memory like a song I no longer played. "No," I said quietly. I thought losing him would destroy me. But it didn't. What I was really afraid of was being alone. But now I know what's worse, being invisible in your own home. She reached across the table and held my hand. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, rooted. The next afternoon, Daniel showed up right on time to see Jerry. I opened the front door and barely recognized him. His face had hollowed out, his eyes dim, shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. "Hey, Karen," he rasped. "Hi," I said, stepping aside. "They're inside." I reached for my coat, ready to leave, but he touched my arm gently. "Please." "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I ruined everything." I looked at him, this man I once loved deeply, now just a shadow of who he had been. There was no anger in me anymore, only clarity. "We both lost something, Daniel," I said gently. "But I've found myself again." I stepped out into the soft rain, the same Seattle drizzle that had once baptized my heartbreak. Now it felt like it was rinsing away what little pain remained. I wandered through Cedar Park, the towering trees whispering in the breeze. Spring was humming through the branches. That evening, I'd share dinner with Mia, giggle with Jerry, maybe paint something wild and free. My life was finally mine. A blank canvas I was learning to fill with my own brush. To everyone who's followed this journey, thank you. You've witnessed the tears, the resilience, the rebirth. If this story resonated with you, hit subscribe. Stay with us. Every shared moment is a stroke of healing, of power, of becoming. Keep creating your story, and I'll see you in the next chapter.